independent of everything else.
Can you repeat this, please?
Sorry?
Can you repeat this last sentence?
Yeah. So this idea of self, unchanging, unitary, independent, is something that was often asserted at the time of the Buddha. A number of spiritual traditions at the time of the Buddha, particularly some that talked about life after life and liberation and so forth, some of those traditions said that the self that was going from life to life and achieving liberation was something unchanging, unitary, meaning a single thing with no parts, and it was completely independent of everything else. And I think perhaps at least some people's idea of soul in Christianity might fit that description. The soul is something that doesn't really change. It's a single thing and it's completely independent of everything else. I think there are some people who use the word soul in this way. This idea of self in Buddhism, it's considered that we do not instinctively have this false sense of me, because this would imply a sense of me over there somewhere, completely independent of the body and the mind. We never have a sense of me that is not somehow with respect to some aspect of the body and the mind. We never have a sense of me over there, for example. So this, of course, does not exist, and it's not something that we instinctively have. It's only something that we would come to hold on to through some wrong way of thinking. But the third one is something that we instinctively have. The technical term you see in the text sometimes is a self that is self-sufficient and substantially existent. Another word is like autonomous. This sense of self is a sense that somewhere here is a me, and this me seems to be something a little bit more than just body and mind, something extra. Hence self-sufficient and quite substantial. Autonomous, meaning that the me that seems to be here seems to be something a little bit more than just the body and the mind. For example, we often say, I have a body, I have a mind, as if there's a third thing here, a me that has this body and has this mind. That me seems to be somewhat distinct from the body and the mind, but yet not somewhere over there. It's mixed in here, but it seems to stand apart a little bit from the body and the mind. Because even sometimes, you know, we might look at our body and we go, oh, I'd like to swap this body for a younger, more beautiful, more healthy body. Sometimes we have these thoughts. And then sometimes we look at our mind and it's a mess, and we may have the thought, I'd like to swap this mind for a more intelligent, more kind, less neurotic mind. But where is the me that could do this swap? Because if we take out this body and mind, what's left over? Is there anything left over? Intellectually, we can appreciate probably not, but instinctively, that's how we see ourselves. Instinctively, there really seems to be a me here that seems to be something more than the body and the mind. That we are coming to try to realize there's no such self. That is what we are talking about here. No self means no autonomous self, no self-sufficient, substantially existent self.
So it's not a person.
Sorry?
It's not the person.
So
It's
Self.
not the narrative self.
self is how we see ourselves existing as a person. No Buddhist tradition says there's no person, no me. The question is, how do we exist? How does the person exist? And the assertion here is the person does not exist like this. The person is not self-sufficient, substantially existent. It's not autonomous. There's no person here that is something more than the body and the mind. But that's our false sense instinctively. Intellectually, we can maybe come to appreciate that, but instinctively, that's how we see ourselves. The me that seems to be here seems to be something a little bit more than just body and mind, something extra. That's this.
And what is the narrative me? The narrative me.
The narrative.
All the stories. Like I am all my story, all my past, all my
Right.
the narrative.
Right. Person.
This is the person.
No, but person, of course, is dependent on the body and the mind. And when we correctly establish I exist, then that can be on the basis of the body. It could be on the basis of some narrative. It could be on the basis of some emotion. The basis of the person is the body and the mind. And it's on any one of those bases that we correctly establish I exist. But there's one more. So this is, in these 3 marks of existence, this no self is referring to this. Tomorrow, when we move into emptiness practice, we can talk about another false sense of self. And that is the idea of inherently existent. And we'll talk about what that means tomorrow. But basically, this idea of self is that there is a me here that is independent of the world. The me that exists from its own side, a me that is findable. And we'll talk about what that really means tomorrow, because this one is not so difficult to appreciate. This is a little bit more challenging, and so we're going to talk quite a lot about this tomorrow. So this is how the word self is sometimes used. So in the context of Vipassana practice, in Theravada, when they talk about no self, they mean that. There's no autonomous me. In the Mahayana, tomorrow, when we talk about no self, we mean no inherently existent me. Any questions about that? Yeah.
The last inherently existent self that
Right.
is separate from the world. It reminded me of the idea of adolescence, Gilei Pagut.
Adolescence?
Yeah, this experience. I don't know how it is in other cultures, but it's connected to awareness and pain. Like, not kind of awareness as being aware, like the separation.
Oh, that's just.
And then also self-absorbent.
Yeah, no, that's sort of more at a conventional level, that we disconnect from our various things. So that's not really talking about how the person exists. That's talking more about, at a conventional level, the dysfunctional tendency of the person by disconnecting from various things. So that's not really a discussion about this.
So it's not like something that forms at a...
I mean, that dysfunctional
at that
tendency
age.
comes because of this false grasping, but it's not the same thing.
But would you say a child does not have this experience?
Babies have this.
Okay.
Everyone has these,
Okay.
according to Buddhism, of course.
Yeah.
Everyone does the self-grasping, even a dog.
Okay.
Especially a dog.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Dependence.
yes. It's the Mahayana.
Yeah, that's here. That's what we're going to look at tomorrow.
So they say also why it's like this.
Hmm?
Why it's like this? Why it starts
Why?
from this?
Why?
From
What's
this false sense of self, and then we should go through this path of finding out the truth.
So I didn't understand the question.
Mm.
Why?
Like,
What?
why we start from this point of false perspective?
Because we've always had the false perspective. There was no beginning. You can't have a false perspective from a correct perspective. It's always been there.
What causes the false perspective?
The false perspective.
I love the circular logic.
No, but I mean, okay, what causes atom? Does an atom come out into existence from nothing?
You know, it depends on the school of physics you want to talk about.
Classical physics.
So not quantum or...
No, we don't go quantum. Because there's too many different assertions in quantum that don't agree. There's many interpretations of quantums, and there's some they don't agree with each other.
Some would say an atom comes from energy. If we stick with
Okay,
Einstein.
where does energy come from?
I don't think we really understand.
Does it come into existence from nothing? Is there a law of causality in the material world?
There is, to some...
Classical physics. Classical physics. Classical physics.
Yes.
There's law of
classical
causality.
physics.
So there's no beginning to matter and energy, according to these principles.
They don't have a theory about what causes the beginning. That doesn't mean that they don't think there's a beginning. They may
No, but I
not
mean,
understand it.
But isn't one of the fundamental principles of classical physics conservation of mass energy? Doesn't that imply there's no beginning
No.
to matter and energy?
No, but you can have something like the Big Bang Theory, which assumes there had to have been an original source of material without understanding where that came from.
Right, but there was a source of material. So that wasn't nothing. It was something.
Potentially, we don't know.
Well, I mean, that's the theory. I mean, classical physics. I mean, they don't know.
They don't know.
I know they don't know, but what is the principle in classical physics is conservation of mass energy. So far, I mean, maybe they'll prove that wrong.
But that's an observation. It's not a theory. So far, we haven't observed anything in which that's violated in classical.
Correct.
So it's
Correct.
Not, it's not necessarily a theory. It's just observation. So it's a bit like impermanence.
But it's a
observation.
theory, yeah. I thought theory is classical physics is conservation of mass energy. This is a theory. No?
That's an observation. It's not.
Yeah, but
like
it's a theory. They call it a theory, don't they? I think so.
This is testing my knowledge of classical mechanics.
Yeah, but I think so. I think it's one of the classic theories of classical physics is the conservation of mass energy, which basically implies there's no beginning. And so similarly here, there's no beginning. Buddhism has similar theory of conservation of consciousness. You can transform it, you can transform different types of energies and so forth, but there's no first cause. It's not like something comes from nothing. So similarly with consciousness, that's the theory in Buddhism. That you can't have something coming from nothing, but you can transform. So a similar idea.
So the sense of me always existed.
The sense of me,
Yeah. So the
false
reason-
sense of me,
Yeah. The reason
yeah,
that
it's
we-
always existed. Yeah, that's the theory.
Even for babies,
Yeah, sure.
a baby.
Maybe try one more time.
It wasn't like we were pure and then we became impure. Always there.
In the Theravada, or the non-self, right?
Yeah.
So they believe it's not autonomous, so it's dependent on its part, right?
Right, but they would say also it inherently exists.
They would say that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
And
Because this inherently existent means findable.
Okay.
And for many Buddhist philosophical systems, if something exists, it must be findable.
So they can find this.
Yeah, it's like the cup is the collection of the parts.
Yeah. Oh, so the cup is inherently existent. So
Yeah,
its
because
qualities are actually there, like the mind.
Yeah, in the Theravada, yeah. There is an independent world there. There's an objective world there. Of course.
And we see, and they think what we perceive is actually objective, because it's like that's
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very different.
yeah. I mean, of course, they would say we're labelling, so when we look there, you might call it a cup, someone might call it something else, but there's something there. What we call it and how we see it is different, but there's an objective reality. There's atoms there.
But in emptiness, it exists as well. We just don't see it.
But no, there's nothing findable.
There's nothing findable in it. What do you mean? I thought emptiness is something exists, but we just don't see it the way it is. We project on it, but it does exist in emptiness. Doesn't
It exists, but it only exists in our conceptual framework. So emptiness does not mean that there's some material there that we are labelling cup. There's nothing there outside of our conceptual framework.
Okay. Oh.
That's emptiness.
Again.
Emptiness is hard to grasp.
Yeah, we're going to look at it a bit tomorrow.
So in the
So-
Theravada, they believe that.
So in Theravada, they're sort of pretty well in line with classical physics. There is an objective world out there. It's made up of very small particles that are changing moment by moment. It's there. We come along and we call that a cup, we call this that, we call that. But there's an objective physical world underlying all of those things we give names to. Mahayana says no.
Because what? Really?
Yeah.
Mahayana says-
Emptiness, they say that it is there. We just
No,
have to-
it's not there.
There's nothing there. But what?
There's
how is it
nothing
different
there
than the other-
independent of our mind. Correct. Nothing.
independent-
There's no objective reality out there.
Really? Okay. So I misunderstood emptiness. Okay.
Like the analogy that's sometimes used is, and we'll talk about this when we finish now because we're running out of time, but an analogy that's often used to describe emptiness is the dream. In the dream, when we're dreaming, there seems to be an independent world there. Right? Material independent world, yeah? If we become lucid, it still appears to be an independent material world. Is there any material world in the dream? No. There's a dream world though, there's a dream world. If you're lucid, it doesn't disappear. It still functions, but we know it's not material, it's not independent of the mind. We see that. And so that's emptiness. Like that.
No physical world.
No, there's a physical world, because in the dream, we still see physical world, but we understand it's not something independent of the mind. When we become lucid, it's not like it sort of melts away or something.
Oh, I get it. So in the Theravada, they believe it's independent of the mind.
Correct.
They don't believe it's dependent. Okay, so now let's
Yes,
okay,
correct.
Okay.
There is a independent reality there.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, last question and we stop.
Just continuing that line of questioning.
Yeah.
So you would say, if we go to quantum physics, it meets more with the Mahayana perception.
Quantum physics, there is a number of different interpretations. Even this sort of wave function collapse and all of this, there's a number of different interpretations there. But at least one school of thought in quantum physics is very close to Madhyamika. For example, one very well-known quantum physicist, Anton Zeilinger, from Austria, one of the leading quantum physicists, he's had a lot of discussions with the Dalai Lama, and their views seem very similar. His interpretation of quantum physics and Zeilinger's view of emptiness. And they've commented to each other that His Holiness has commented to Anton Seilinger that it's amazing that he can come up with this view through running experiments. And he's commented to His Holiness that it's amazing he can come to this insight by meditation. They're both amazed at how they more or less came to the same understanding through completely different approaches.
Can you please repeat about dream? That when you're lucid, I didn't catch it.
Well, when you become, I mean, in the dream, there appears to be a material world. You know, you go, oh, solid.
In a dream when I'm sleeping?
Sorry?
When I'm sleeping?
When you're in the dream. When you're in the dream, you know, there's material objects in the dream, you know. Yeah, I think.
It's a dream, yes.
Yeah, but they're in the dream, the dream mind thinks they're material. No? In your dream, when you're dreaming, you believe it material.
Okay.
If you become lucid in the dream, without waking up, so you're in the dream still, and you realise it's a dream, it still appears the same. No, it still appears to be solid.
But I know it's
But you realise that it's not like that. You realise that it's a product of your mind. There's no external material world in the dream at all.
Okay, so in life, when we are lucid, we can...
Yeah, lucid by realising emptiness. If we realise emptiness and we come out, we're in daily life, there will still appear to be an independent world there that seems to be independent of us. But because we're lucid with emptiness, we'll realise this is not how it is.
Okay.
But anyway, this is tomorrow's discussion.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, very last point.
What's the method that in Theravada they use to identify that there's no self-sufficient, substantial, existing person?
Because they often do like the body scan and then scanning the mind, and there's no sign of any self there. There's just a changing body and a changing mind. There's nothing extra.
So actually the impermanence
Can lead to this, yes.
So there's no difference in the way they approach it?
No, I mean there's a couple of ways you can approach it, and we'll approach it in a different way tomorrow that's more Mahayana, but I think generally and I have not much experience in Theravada practice, but generally my understanding is when you do the 4 applications of mindfulness, you look in the body and see is there a self there, and all you see is just changing, and then they look in the mind and they just see changing thoughts and emotions. There's no sign of a self anywhere.
And why would they assume that the person is any different than any other object? Why would they assume that the person is any different than any other object? Because they think externally there's an objective world.
Right, and there is an objective person.
Why? I mean, if they realize that about themselves,
Right.
selflessness, why would they not assume the same thing about the objective world?
Yeah, but
It's out there.
But the person exists from its own side. The person exists independently in Theravada. It's something we label on the body and the mind. And that exists. That's real. So the person's real.
Impermanent and independent.
Sorry?
They come to a conclusion that it's impermanent and independent.
Yes. Independent of the world. Yes. Because there is an objective world. They don't see any contradiction in that. In fact, most Buddhist philosophical systems would agree with that. And it makes sense, you know. We see there's a body here, and it's just constantly changing. We see there's a mind here that's constantly changing. But they're there, no? But is there anything more than a changing body and a changing mind? Doesn't seem to be. So where is this autonomous self? Because autonomous self means something more than body and mind. We look here, there's nothing more than body and mind. That's a realization of this. But there's still a body and a mind here. Okay, it's changing moment by moment, but it's there. There's a physical body there that's changing moment by moment. There's a mind that's changing moment by moment. It's there. So therefore there's a person there.
There is a sense.
Because the person is something you label on that body and mind, which is there, even though both are changing moment by moment.
And in Mahayana,
And Mahayana, no. They say nothing. They say there's no body there, there's no mind there, there's no person there to be found. That doesn't mean no person, that does not mean there's no body, no mind, no person. It just means they're not findable. But that's tomorrow's discussion. Okay, let's finish there. Let's finish again with the Shavasana meditation.